to his sister Winneretta's home in Paris. And as we learned last week, Winneretta followed in her mother's footsteps by becoming a great patroness of the arts. She hosted a popular salon along with her second husband, the Prince de Polignac. It was at one of these salons in 1901 that Paris met the woman who would impact his life in both scandalous and tragic ways. That woman, of course, was Isadora Duncan, who was at that time still an aspiring dancer. Very quickly about Isadora, she was born in San Francisco, California in 1877, and her father was a banker and a mining engineer who was soon exposed for financial fraud after her death.
Oh, no.
I'm sorry, after her death, goodness gracious, after her birth. And so her mother divorced him and moved the family to Oakland, California. They were pretty poor. Her mother worked 2 jobs, one as a seamstress and the other as a piano teacher. And Isadora soon dropped out of school at the age of 10 because she was not, she didn't like routine or being confined or anything like that. So she dropped out of school and started teaching dance lessons to local children and continued to do that all the way up through her teens. And back then, so there were only kind of 2 recognized forms of dance, ballet, and then you had theatrical dancing, stuff that was done, burlesque or on Broadway shows, that kind of thing. Beyond like professional dancing, as in not like, ballroom dancing or whatever, stuff that you could do as a quote unquote career. In 1896, she traveled to Chicago to audition for theatrical companies and landed a position in Augustin Daly's dance company. She quickly took a dislike to it and dropped out. She took a few ballet lessons and hated that as well. So no surprise, she basically pioneered modern dance as we kind of know it. And feeling underappreciated in America, she took off for London, where she ended up being hired out to dance at aristocratic parties. She then went on to Paris, where, surprise, surprise, she met Paris Singer. Although they did not become involved initially, as Isadora soon began touring Europe. While she was touring around, she did eventually settle in Berlin and had an affair with a married actor in 1904 and gave birth to a daughter in 1906. So the interesting thing that I found in most of the newspapers that I looked at this time around was that it was reported that she married this guy, even though he was already married. And apparently it was kind of his MO to like shack up with women and have children with them. And so, yeah, it was very interesting. It was like they were trying to cover up the fact that she led this scandalous life, even though they were on the opposite hand.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Since usually the newspapers love salacious
exactly
detail and anything that's not, of the...
Well, they would report on the fact that she was rather scandalous in her dancing. She would dance barefooted, and she would kind of wear these sort of Grecian toga type things that were kind of see-through.
I didn't know anything about her life, but certainly in the in the dance world, I guess she's extremely
influential.
Influential.
She is.
She had a short and very sad life.
She did. She ended up, so she was in Berlin. She operated a dance school while she was living there. But when it closed in 1908, she returned to Paris the following year and had a triumphant run at the Gaieté Lyrique Theater. And it was there that Paris appeared in her dressing room one night and apparently said, "I have come to help you. What can I do?" So apparently, when you're bored and wealthy, that's what you do.
Hang up my clothes.
Right, exactly. Go do the dishes. That's what I need you to do. So the two embarked on a rather torrid affair. Paris's marriage was on the rocks, obviously.
To Isabella. And did he live... Wait, she's in Berlin?
She's left and gone back to Paris.
Okay.
To be with Paris. Okay. To be with Paris in Paris. Mm-hmm. And so they ended up traveling through Europe together for a while. And in September of 2009, they were in Venice and she turned up pregnant. So by May of 1910, they settled in Paris. And this was after they sailed up the Nile, because that's what you do.
Wow. And
their son Patrick was born that May. That summer, Paris took Isadora and Patrick and set them up at Oldway, the Wigwam, in England.
Wow.
And built a grand ballroom for her to dance in.
Oh, well, that's very romantic.
Yeah, he had his romantic moments. Now, his big thing was that he wanted to go around and like build theaters for her to dance in. Now, he didn't always follow through. There was actually an article that I ran across in 1912 where they'd gone to this big society ball in Paris, and somebody was making overtures to Isadora, and he basically started a fight with them. And it said that the next day that he was, quote, very poorly and that he had to leave for London and that his plans to build this theater for her had been scrapped. I was like, okay. Kind of random, but, you know, they seem to be rather random people. So
by the time he met her, she had already had
one child with another man.
Okay,
yeah.
Just the one.
Right.
Okay. And then where was that child? Because she ends up having 8, which is insane.
Really?
There were 8 total. One son and 7 daughters.
Are you sure?
But 2 of them died.
Yeah, because I only had, like, I guess she had more.
2 of them died in 1913, so maybe you only found 6.
I guess she went on and had more.
Yeah.
Okay. So
she was with 5 men total.
Okay.
Was only married to 1.
Okay.
And then lost 2 children. So,
all right.
Yeah.
So you're probably thinking, amidst all these romantic gestures, you know, where's Paris's wife, Lily?
Correct. I was wondering that.
Well, she was in London, apparently holding parties at the Ritz and taking society by storm.
So she's doing okay.
Yeah. I mean, as long as he's paying the bills, you know.
Right. She's got $15,000 a month of his money
a week.
She can spend. A week, that's right, that she can spend. So, hey.
Yeah. So it would be said later on in the papers that Paris had left her in 1910. And that initially she didn't suspect that he was carrying on with anyone. So she filed a petition for the restitution of her conjugal rights, which I think that sounds like a counter separation. It's like, you can't go anywhere. You need to pay my bills because we're married. Yeah.
Restitution, recompense for injury or loss.
I always think of conjugal rights as being sex, but I guess you could look at it as other stuff, financial.
Okay.
I guess it's just kind of the same thing where they used to.
In English law, restitution of conjugal rights was an action in the ecclesiastical courts and later in the court of divorce and matrimonial causes. It was one of the actions relating to marriage. That's not really helpful. I'm sorry. I just saw the initial blurb. It could be brought against a husband or wife who is guilty of, quote, subtraction, that is, living away from their spouse without a good reason.
Oh.
If the suit was successful, the married couple would be required to live together again. So it's the opposite of divorce.
Right.
Like,
okay.
You've been away from me. I don't know why. I'm not sure what you're doing. I'm going to bring this suit against you. If I win, you have to live with me again.
Right.
So you're so right. Restoration of togetherness, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. So she wanted him back, but I do find it kind of strange that she didn't know that he was carrying on with Isadora, because by 1910, he'd already had a child with her and was setting her up at Old Way. So, I mean, you'd have to be blind not to notice that. But meanwhile, well, I think she ended up withdrawing that petition. And so I'm assuming that they came...
She didn't want him back.
Well, I think they probably came to some kind of compromise.
Okay.
Like, you know...
I'll let you go.
I'll pay you if, you know, hang out over there. And so, of course, meanwhile, Paris is busy building theaters for Isadora to perform in. So... they ended up arguing more than anything by this time. And so, according to some sources, their romantic relationship ended in 1912.
He and Isadora.
And we know this because Paris later stated that he began living with another woman at this time. In 1913, tragedy struck when Paris and Isadora's son Patrick, along with Isadora's older daughter, were drowned when their car rolled into the Seine in Paris.
That's really sad.
I know, it's really crazy. So what happened was, apparently they were in a chauffeur-driven vehicle with their nanny, and the chauffeur had to veer off the road to avoid being hit by another car. And I guess that chaotic action caused the car to shut off. And so he got out of the car to crank it up, but he forgot to put it in park. And so when he cranked it up, the car just took off and rolled down. Apparently they were in a kind of hilly area, rolled down the hill, jumped over basically another road, and went straight off the embankment into the river. And the idiot goes to the police. he doesn't go and try to like rescue them, which that just blows my mind. It makes no sense whatsoever.
They just sink with the car. They can't get out. I mean,
literally,
yeah, screaming for help.
Yeah, and so they said that they pulled them out and they were unconscious and they couldn't resuscitate them. Both the children and the nanny.
Oh, gosh.
So, I mean, I guess back then, though, I mean, it wasn't necessary, not everybody knew how to swim. So I guess,
Yeah.
But needless to say, Isadora was absolutely devastated by this and was probably a little bit unstable as a result. She ran off to Italy and got pregnant by another man who she later said in her autobiography she begged to sleep with her because she wanted another child. And Paris continued to... So she ran off to Italy and got pregnant by this other man. And she would later say in her autobiography that she literally begged him to impregnate her because she wanted another child. And the baby died soon after that.
Well, I wonder if... So it wasn't a miscarriage. She had the child and it died. So maybe that was one of the 8 as well.
So that would be 3.
Yeah.
Now, Paris kept an eye on her because, of course, she was worried about her. Mm-hmm. And the records of them seeing each other...
Wait, so the child he had with her was one of the 2 that died?
Patrick, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so he continued to kind of look after her. They saw each other off and on, and he basically continued to bankroll her while she was sort of touring around, not being entirely successful. Mm-hmm. And there's actually a photograph of them that was taken in 1914. So they were at least on friendly terms. Mm-hmm. Now... This is a really strange thing that I found in one article about their relationship. It said in 1917, Paris purchased the option on Madison Square Garden.
What?
Yes. And of course, by then...
Wait, 1917?
Yep.
So this is 10 years after White was shot. He got shot in 06, I think.
Yeah. By this time, it was a high-class sporting club that staged boxing matches, but they also had a big place for society event. There was an article in there about some big ball being held there at one point. So apparently he offered it to Isadora as a gift and she turned him down publicly. Oh. And so after that, they pretty much parted ways. As you might imagine.
So that was it.
Yep. Like I said, I couldn't find anything in the papers about this, so I kind of wonder if it came from her autobiography. So that could mean that it's true or could mean that it's false. So now we are up to 1918, which is a very big year in Paris's life because he meets his new BFF.
Yep. Addison Meisner.
Adrian is going to tell us all about him.
I learned more about Meisner and South Florida. I knew sort of superficially about Boca Raton and Meisner's name, but man, he had a wild ride of a life. Truly, Meisner sort of is the epitome of South Florida architecture. You can't really talk about the establishment of the Florida aesthetic without mentioning his name. And like I said, I've known the name Meisner and been aware of some of his commissions since the first time I lived in Florida in 1988 or 89. And I don't know how as a child of 10, Meisner's name entered in my vocabulary, but somehow it did, and it stuck. His style fuels my love of historic Florida design. When I think of old Florida, I think of the bungalows of Jacksonville and St. Pete and Tampa, but that's, 20s and 30s, and Meisner and, Spanish Revival Mediterranean is slightly earlier than that, really when the boom of Florida tourism was happening. And it's sort of that picture I paint in my mind because you can find a bungalow pretty much everywhere, right? Sears kit houses are just the kind of bungalow style. But his vision of South Florida, drawing from his travels in Spain, was really one of a kind. His existence on the time spectrum of architecture in Florida was fairly limited, but his influence is everywhere. A social historian even ranked him with the likes of Richard Morris Hunt and our friend, the man we all love to hate, Stanford White. as one of the country's great society architects. Addison Mizner was actually born on the left coast, far from Florida, in Benicia, California in 1872. This came as a surprise to me, and they really just kept on coming. His family was the first of that town and one of the first families of the state. You can imagine that it would be a wild place so soon after the Civil War, and when the nation was finding its footing economically and socially and experiencing tremendous growth. Mizner never went to school for architecture. Instead, he learned from his extensive travels and an apprenticeship. He studied design in Guatemala during his father's short stint as an American diplomat in Central America, and also gathered inspiration